Hello, good afternoon everyone, and welcome to this press conference on EU and US cooperation to restore trust following the allegations of the NSA's mass surveillance of EU citizens. Without further ado, I'll give the floor immediately to the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the European Parliament, Elmar Brok. You have the floor.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. We had today several discussions with Mike Rogers and his delegation. Especially Mike Rogers is the chair of the Intelligence Committee of the House. And we do that together with Claude Moraes from LIBE, because we had this joint discussion already in October in Washington, which was an intensive debate. And we are thankful that our American friends came over to continue this debate in order to find a solution. Let's make me a few remarks before I give to Mike and Claude the floor. I think first of all, we have to clarify that we Europeans are not happy with the situation, both in the question of data protection law and as the question what NSA does in detail. But we are very clear that we can have this discussion with our American friends because America is a country of democracy and the rule of law, and that we live on common values. We could not have such a debate with the parliament of a country where Mr. Snowden is at the moment a host, and we could not do it with China. That's a big difference. We are critical, but we know the difference. I think we want to be clear in the very beginning. We believe that it would be very helpful if the long ongoing negotiations about a data protection umbrella agreement could be concluded so fast as possible. The European Parliament had accepted to ratify, for example, SWIFT and PNR agreement because it was promised to get a data protection umbrella agreement between the European Union and the United States. This agreement is more or less ready, with the exception of the rights of European citizens. And if on that overall data protection question we could find proper solutions, a lot of other things might become easier. We want to have a cooperation in fighting terror. What we have to discuss then, after we have to solve the data protection question, is in which way it can be done, where the limits are. Because we want to have the cooperation, but we know it is always the purpose of a parliament to control intelligence service in that way that it does not grow too fast and too big. And that, I think, it's always a question where we have to find such a balance between privacy, freedom on one side, and security on the other side. And I think here we have to do the discussion partly on the European level, partly on national level, because intelligence forces is national competence, data protection is European competence. And I believe that we have the solution on that data protection umbrella agreement, for example, and the related questions. It would be much easier that other important questions where a common interest are, like TTIP, are not endangered. Because we believe that in both our political and economic interest that we have an agreement like TTIP, in a common interest. And therefore, we believe to solve these problems relatively fast in a certain way, that this does stop because of emotional reason, real reason whatsoever. Then I think I'm quite optimistic. It's not so far that we as parliamentarians are the negotiators, but I have a feeling that on both sides is a debate opened. Also on the United States side is a debate opened, also in Congress it's open. We hear from court cases which give different messages, but it shows that there is some openness in that, and therefore I believe that this will go forward, and we do not come then to dangerous answers like cancelling safe harbor agreement, all that, because it would have also negative implications for both sides, and hopefully this can be avoided if we are clever, intelligent enough to come to solutions in the first field of data protection in the beginning. Mike, the floor is yours.
Go back to the moderator.
It's fine, thank you. I'll give now the floor to the rapporteur for the European Parliament inquiry on mass surveillance. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
I'm just going to do a quick introduction and then we go. Is that okay?
I'm for the rapporteur.
Just is that okay? Just a quick introduction. Mr. Brok is speaking for the Foreign Affairs Committee. I just want to mention I'm Claude Moraes. I'm the lead on the Committee of Inquiry into Mass Surveillance. I'll be presenting a draft report tomorrow at the inquiry to both support what Elmar Brok has said, firstly about the issue of trust between us and the United States. With Mike Rogers, we re-established very valuable connections through Elmar Brok and the Foreign Affairs Committee in October. It was essential to do that, and today we welcome the full group who have arrived today, and I think we've spoken very frankly about the issues. Elmar Brok has set that out. What I wanted to mention was that in doing so, we managed to speak about some of the key issues where we would agree, but also some disagreements, of course. But in presenting the report tomorrow, we also discussed some of the issues that we discussed between our delegations. And I wanted to emphasise some of those which Elmar Brok has mentioned. But certainly tomorrow we will present some of those ideas that the EU-US transfer of personal data should depend on the conclusion of an umbrella agreement which needs to protect EU citizens' rights. That is on the table, and that must happen as soon as possible. We are very discontent with the Safe Harbour Agreement, and we believe that should be suspended, and a TFTP, there is a TFTP problem until there's a redress mechanism for EU citizens. And we should adopt the data protection package in 2014. And I think we should ensure that there are a whole range of reforms for European citizens in relation to the NSA surveillance package, which I'm happy for you to ask questions about. We will go to plenary with the report in February, and the report will go to committee in January. I just want to say that by way of introduction before we have some questions.
Well, first of all, thank you very much. We've experienced, the American delegation has experienced great hospitality in Brussels since we've gotten here, and I would assure you all that there has been both spirited and pointed conversation. So even in the notion of diplomacy across the pond, we have, there's no shortage of shyness in these rooms debating issues that I know you all have concerns of, as do Americans. And I think one of the conclusions was that in the first emotional conversations on both sides, we moved to a more substantive conversation, and now I think we've gotten to a place where we've identified our differences. I do believe that over the course of October and recent meetings here in Brussels as well. And again, we're the National Security Committee in the United States, so we bring a national security perspective to the conversation, which is why we thought it was so important to be here. And that sometimes in the conversations about using terms like mass surveillance or other things, I think has a different meaning to us than maybe it does our European allies. We don't believe there is mass surveillance as the way it's described. So we're finally starting to narrow the definitions so that we can talk about the same things at the same time. And we bring that perspective of for every American terrorist plot we have disrupted 3 in the European Union. To us, that's important. And so we want to make sure that we find a solution that doesn't disrupt the ability for American intelligence services working with European intelligence services to disrupt terrorist plots in the European Union. Also to continue work on counter-proliferation. We also worry of that. Also to continue work on foreign agent efforts to undermine political stability both in Europe and the United States. Also to undermine and work together on an unprecedented level of Chinese economic cyber espionage, but maybe the largest transfer of wealth in the history of the world, all done by theft. All of these things are a threat to both the European economy and the American economy. So we sat at the table looking at the security perspective of what is a very complicated world when a communication can travel around the world in a nanosecond and touch systems in just about every continent before it rests in its final place. And because of that new modern technology, it means that our intelligence services have to even be better at trying to collect information to keep us all safe. So that's the debate we find ourselves in. We want to be good partners to our European unions, friends and allies. We don't want to disrupt what has been 70 years, I think, the strongest allegiance the world in the history of the world. And we're going to continue to do that. So again, today was a day that we finally got to trying to identify the very sharp differences we may have left in a data agreement so that we can get on to TTP for that very valuable reason of which, if you think about the economic power of an agreement between Europe and the United States in a world that is changing both from a national security perspective and a policy perspective, how valuable that would be to both our European allies and the United States, and it would be the single largest economic power block in the world. And I would argue, given the challenges we face, and the challenges are still there, the Ukraine seems to be drifting into the Russian sphere, the Chinese expansionism in the South China Sea, those are problems we will all encounter. I think they're best encountered if we do it together, and that's really what today our delegation trip to Brussels has been all about. Mr. Chairman? Or Mr. Yeah.
Thank you. We can open the floor for questions now. Just remember to mention your name and the media you work for before stating the question. We start here, please.
Ian Trainer from the Guardian newspaper. Question for Congressman Rogers. A couple of points. The New York Times is reporting this morning that Chancellor Merkel in Berlin told President Obama directly in October that the NSA, the National Security Agency, could not be trusted, basically because it had leaked considerably, and therefore Snowden had got hold of all this material. So the NSA was untrustworthy, and she compared its operations effectively to the country that she grew up in, a communist dictatorship in East Germany, and she told Obama, this is like the Stasi. That is the quotation from Merkel to Obama in October. What, as an leading American politician, I mean, when a German chancellor says that about the American Security Agency, how does that make you feel? The second point is that you've just said that for every terrorist plot disrupted in America, 3 have been preempted in Europe. A federal judge in Maryland yesterday, on the basis of the evidence of bulk data collection, said, again I quote, there is no evidence that a single act of terrorism has been prevented. Can you comment on that, please?
On the New York Times, I won't comment on the New York Times piece or a conversation that may or may not have occurred with our president and Ms. Merkel. I can tell you this, that much of what we see, and no offense to The Guardian, but it's not exactly accurate. You get 3 pieces of a 1,000-piece puzzle and come to a conclusion about what information you have and what it means in the world of collection. Just because an intelligence service has a phone number doesn't mean they listen to a phone number. We do believe, for those of us in the national security space, that it's important. Well, let me just leave it at that. We engage in activities in the United States Intelligence Service we believe has national security interests to the United States and our allies. And we have an untold number of layers of oversight that I never really hear mentioned in the European press. Candidly, it is better than any European nation has on its intelligence services. And we have, think of this, what other intelligence service in the world is required to go to a court to get an approval for foreign intelligence collection, the FISA court? You won't find that anywhere in the world. So in addition to that court oversight, you have congressional oversight, both the House Intelligence Committee, the Senate Intelligence Committee, both bipartisanly made up committees. You have an independent inspector general. You have Department of Justice. And then you have the checks and balances within each intelligence service that reports back to the United States Congress. So we believe within that framework of oversight and the demands on collecting information that is accurate and exact and prevents terrorist activity, that we've structured it about right. Can we work on transparency? Sure, I think we can. I think we're going to do that. This committee is working with President Obama on some review and some recommendations that are getting ready to come out on this. On the court case, I would look, the court case is in defiance of what we have already seen go through the appellate court system in the United States and the Supreme Court. So the body of legal precedent on this particular case is huge, and this is just one case. So what will happen is this will go through the process. It'll go to the appellate court. And I think the judge knew that this decision was a bit out there when he stayed his own ruling because it had such serious national security implications. So I believe, and I think many of us believe, that 225 years of property law, it wasn't about technology ruling, it was about who owns business records under the American system, and I think the European system is very close to this. So that's what that decision was about. And we think because you extrapolate that decision over the course of a business community, it's incredibly disruptive to about who owns those business records. And that's why we think that particular case won't stand.
Thank you. There were a couple of questions there. Yeah.
Jennifer Baker from IDG News Service. I just want to pick up on that question. How many terrorist plots have been foiled? We haven't heard any numbers, and then I can times that by 3 to get the figures I need. Also a question on safe harbour. I've heard many sort of statements from both the EU and the US side that it is valuable, but with only 4,000 odd companies in the US signed up to it, how can that be deemed to be a success when there are hundreds of thousands of companies in the US?
On the matter of the numbers, I will tell you the top line number that has been released in public is 54 total. That's US and European combined. I'll let you do the math. That we believe are directly related to the programs of which are in question. On safe harbor, it is a work in progress. Our FTC, our enforcement arm, has had about 10 successful cases when it comes to companies violating privacy from a private perspective. None, by the way, from our intelligence services. There haven't been any determination that that's happened since the beginning of it. And we know that there are other cases in the pipeline on violations of safe harbor. So that, I think, as our relationship grows and our understanding grows about data privacy, I think that you'll see more enrollment seeking, candidly, the protections that safe harbor would offer a company operating internationally, specific between the United States and the European Union.
Just quickly on safe harbour, we had a hearing where the Galexia report was stated, which gave very compelling evidence of the flaws in safe harbour. This is a political view across the spectrum in the Parliament. One of my shadow rapporteur colleagues is leading on that, Mr Voss from the European People's Party. It's a view that I take. I'm writing the report collectively with him. This is why we want the umbrella agreement. We expressed this view in Washington in October with the Federal Trade Commission face-to-face. We do understand the Americans take a different view, but this is going to be one of the strong aspects of our report in February, but we can be very clear about it now. And the draft report expressing our view in safe harbour has already been tabled.
To the numbers, I can say 1 point. In my own region, only together with the Americans, the cooperation of German and American intelligence services, it was possible to stop the so-called Sauerland bombers. I think it was 3 years ago, which they would not have been caught. It would have meant a lot of dead people in Germany. And here was it as well to have the cooperation. What we discuss is the dimension, and should be not a limit not the principle of cooperation.
May I just say we do need redress, so we need something else for the companies and safe commerce. I need to add that.
So, Jeremy Fleming from Euractiv. Congressman, can I just ask if you have had the chance to discuss the impending appearance by video link of Edward Snowden in this Parliament, and whether or not what your personal thoughts on the Parliament's decision to offer him that opportunity? And one other question, if I may. You referred to the Chinese cyber espionage as representing the largest transfer by theft. On what basis do you make that suggestion?
I'll take the the gentleman who's released information from the United States first. I won't tell you exactly what I'm thinking. I'm not sure it would be fit to print. We have strong concerns. We've had very, very direct dialogue with our colleagues and compatriots in the European Union. I personally do not believe it rises to the dignity of this body to have someone who is wanted for a crime in the United States for stealing information that has jeopardized the lives of U.S. soldiers in Afghanistan and other places around the world. I do believe that this would have a reaction in the United States that would not be helpful to a constructive dialogue as we continue to work out our differences here. And I'm not sure how much more pointed I can be. I think we have had good discussions here. I felt very comfortable that they have heard our collective concerns on that. I relate it to having the janitor of the bank who figured out how to steal some money being brought in to talk about high finance and solve the problem. Not a great idea. On China, what we know is their cyber theft is alive and well. I will tell you that one American company lost its intellectual property. What they're doing, by the way, is getting into these systems, and any economy that is an innovation economy, European countries, Germany is a big target of their economic espionage, the United States. And they're stealing that material, those blueprints that allow a business to operate and create new products, taking it back, repurposing it, and putting it back into the economy to compete against those companies. It is a tremendous drag on the European economy and the U.S. economy. One very large American manufacturer had that theft happen. They estimate it cost just them, one company in America, 25,000 manufacturing jobs. One company, one intellectual property theft repurposed in China. And part of our concern is that we don't have, even today, we don't have a good united front against cyber economic espionage from the Chinese. We hope to do that. I think our strongest allies in that fight will be the Europeans. And if we don't stop it soon, we are robbing or allowing the Chinese to rob the next generation of prosperity from all our communities. It is as serious a national security problem as I have ever seen that we in the United States, and I think our European allies are about right there, are unable to handle today. And because there's no consequence to their actions to date, it continues unabated.
But then it's also important that we do not between ourselves, because there's in Europe certain mistrust that it's also used between the United States and America for industrial questions.
But I think
here that will come back to square zero, that we have to have safeguards for that doesn't happen.
But I have to address that. This is important. The United States intelligence services do not collect information for economic gain. They do not do it. It's not in their charge. It's against their mission. It would be a violation of U.S. law. So some notion that that's happening because we're tracking terrorists or counterproliferators who are trying to move radiological material to the European Union is just wrong. And we need to make that very clear point. And because of that confusion and the muddling of this debate, it has allowed the Chinese to absolutely steal us blind when it comes to intellectual property from European and American companies. I think my ranking member reminds me that the Cyber Command of the United States estimates that $400 billion worth of intellectual property has been stolen, primarily by the Chinese. That is a significant problem for all of us, and the future prosperity of our countries.
Thank you very much. I think there was another question there. Yeah, first there, Huffington Post. No, sorry. First of all, I think this person in front of you had a question before.
Sorry, this is Daniel Basteiro from the Huffington Post. I'd like to ask you, Mr. Rogers, what would be the consequence for the EU-US relationships, the transatlantic relationships, if the EU was to revise or suspend the Safe Harbor Agreement or the TFTP? I mean, what would happen from the US side if the EU takes action? Thanks.
Well, again, the best action we can take is working collaboratively to a solution, and I think that's where we are, and I hope that's where we end up. We need to understand the safe harbor provisions will harm economically the Europeans as much, if not greater, than the United States. European companies who have invested in the United States need that safe harbor provision to conduct their business in a way that makes them competitive. And I would hope that we wouldn't try to interrupt that for a political fight. And I don't think we are. I think we've as I said, I hope you all understand, we've exchanged some there's been no holding back on both parties as we try to negotiate. And I think that's good. We'll get to a better place. You're talking about the SWIFT program. That's a program that works. It's a model for how the Europeans and the United States have harmonized our ability to protect privacy and still get the information needed for security. To suspend the one notion that would be the one model for cooperation, I think would be a bad idea. I think that would be a hostage, not necessary in a debate where I think we can come to a more amicable conclusion in the negotiations.
Okay, so I think we had another question here. Yeah.
Hello. Germán Aranda for El Mundo. For the firstly for Moraes, I wanted to ask for if he can advance a little bit the main lines of the text of the European Parliament gonna present tomorrow.
Okay. Just in terms of the parliamentary report, there's going to be 6 reports, and this is the final draft being presented tomorrow before the committee. It's going to set out 3 sets of reforms, our suggestions for national parliaments, suggestions for EU reform, and suggestions about our relationship with the United States. So that would include issues like safe harbour and so on. So in all of these areas, we're going to make what are essentially suggestions, there are a whole range of issues about scrutiny, about our options, and we're going to set out different options. I gave you an example of some on the umbrella agreement and so on. But if I just give you a snapshot relating to the previous question, it's not an issue about consequences or sanctions, it's an issue about trying to find agreement. On safe harbour, for example, it is absolutely right that the EU citizens benefit from safe harbour. It's an issue of our rapporteurs and myself finding that essential parts of the agreement just didn't work for us, and that we're trying to find a reform. So it's about working hard to do that. And on TFTP, of course, we want that to happen, but in the report we talk about ensuring that data issues are not put into the agreement, because we want to ensure that the data regulation is the key aspect of what we do, and we look to the future. We want EU governments to implement the data regulation immediately. So it's a really wide-ranging piece of work, and it talks about EU governments as well, which is very important, as well as our relationship with the United States. So it's quite a wide-ranging report which will be tabled tomorrow. It's in draft, and then that will be amended by members before it's presented finally to plenary in February. So I stress that it's a draft report which will then be amended by members of Parliament.
And another one for Mr. Rogers, who said that they don't make economical surveillance. But there is that case about Petrobras, the Brazilian company in Brazil, which were proofs that there were surveillance against it. What kind of, if it's not economical, why could the United States spy them?
Again, I think the characterization of the Petrobras case is inaccurate. It's not completely accurate, number one. And number two, when you have adversaries intermingling with our allies, it's best that we understand exactly what that relationship is. And again, there is no economic espionage conducted by the U.S. intelligence services. It is not in their charter. We don't allow it. That's not in their mission set. And they would have no way to distribute that information that would be valuable to any economic interest in the United States because of the way we've structured them and the oversight that this committee provides to make sure that doesn't happen.
Okay, thank you very much. That's all for now. We have to close press conference here. Anyway, thank you very much for attending press conference. Have a nice afternoon. Thank you.